Welcome back, guys, to Mr. Cursed. In today's video, I'm sharing 9 really scary true stories that happened on the Appalachian Trail. These creepy stories will make you think twice about going hiking alone in the mountains. But before we start, please hit subscribe and don't forget to like this video and share it with your friends. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Thank you all. Now, let's get started. I'm 31 and work as a pizza delivery driver out of Charlotte. Not exactly a career, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving instead of stuck behind some desk all day. Last October, I'd been dealing with angry customers and late deliveries for months straight, and I was burned out bad. Needed to get away from people completely, so I decided to take a solo camping trip up in the North Carolina mountains. Found this spot called Deep Creek on some hiking forums, supposed to be pretty isolated, which was exactly what I wanted. I drove up on a Friday afternoon, took about 3 hours to get there through all those winding mountain roads. The campsite was perfect, completely empty, no other cars in the parking area, just me and the forest. It was that time in October when the leaves were still changing, all these reds and oranges everywhere, and the air had that crisp bite to it that makes you feel alive again. I hiked about 2 miles in to reach the actual camping area, and by the time I got my tent set up, the sun was already starting to dip behind the ridge. The silence out there was incredible. After months of car horns and people yelling about cold pizza, hearing absolutely nothing but my own footsteps was like therapy. I made myself some dinner on my little camp stove, just some canned chili and crackers, and sat there enjoying the fact that I hadn't heard a single human voice in hours. No cell service either, which was fine by me. I'd brought a paperback book and figured I'd read until I got tired, then sleep better than I had in months. Around 10 o'clock, I was getting ready to turn in when I heard this whistle from somewhere in the woods behind my tent. It was really clear and sharp, like someone calling their dog back to them. The kind of whistle you make with your fingers, you know? But it was perfect. Same exact pitch, same exact length, and it happened again at about 30 seconds later. Then again, same timing. At first I figured there was another camper out there somewhere. Maybe their dog had wandered off. But the whistle was too consistent, too mechanical almost. Same note, same duration, every 30 seconds like clockwork. And after the 4th or 5th time, I realized the forest had gone completely quiet. No insects buzzing, no night birds, no wind in the trees, just that whistle, cutting through the silence every half minute. Then I heard it get answered. The response came from the opposite side of my campsite, across the creek. Same exact tone, same length, but definitely from a different direction. My skin started crawling because now I was definitely surrounded by at least 2 people, and they were communicating with each other using these whistles. But why? And why hadn't I seen any other cars at the trailhead? A 3rd whistle answered from behind me, then a 4th from down by the water. 4 different positions, all around my little campsite, all making the exact same sound every 30 seconds. But these weren't normal whistles. There was something wrong with them, like they had multiple tones layered underneath, almost like hearing someone whistle while they're also humming. But the humming was too low, too deep. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam toward where the first whistle had come from. The light cut through about 20 yards of trees before hitting something that made my blood freeze. There was a figure standing perfectly still between 2 pine trees, and it was tall, really tall, maybe 8 feet, covered in what looked like coarse fur, like a deer hide. But it was standing upright on 2 legs. Its face, Jesus, I still dream about that face. All the features were in the right places. 2 eyes, nose, mouth, but the proportions were all wrong. The eyes were too far apart and reflected D in my flashlight beam, and the mouth was vertical instead of horizontal, like a slit running up and down instead of side to side. As I watched, frozen in place, it opened that vertical mouth and the whistle came out. I could see rows of human teeth inside, perfectly white and straight, but arranged in a way that made no sense. The sound that came out wasn't just a whistle anymore. I could hear all those undertones clearly now, like multiple frequencies hitting my ears at once. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the flashlight, but I managed to swing the beam around to where the other whistles were coming from. More figures stepped into the light, and they were all slightly different but equally wrong. One had arms that reached almost to the ground, knuckles dragging through the dead leaves. Another one's head was on backwards, but it was walking forward normally, like that was perfectly natural. They all had antlers, but growing from the wrong places. Shoulders, backs. One had a single antler growing straight out of its chest. The smell hit me then. Wet dog mixed with copper pennies and something rotting. I could taste it in the back of my throat, thick and metallic. They started whistling back and forth to each other in complex patterns, like they were having a conversation. Some of the frequencies they hit made my ears hurt, and I realized my nose was bleeding. But the worst part was when I found myself whistling back without meaning to. My mouth just opened and this pattern came out like my body was responding on its own. When I whistled, they all stopped and tilted their heads at exactly the same angle, listening. One of them started walking toward me, but sideways like a crab, its head still facing forward. It reached out with a hand that had 5 fingers, but they were all the same length. No thumb, just 5 identical digits. It touched the side of my tent with one finger, and ice crystals immediately started spreading out from where it made contact. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath, and I'm talking about going from maybe 60 degrees to below freezing in seconds. Using its finger, it drew symbols in the frost. Triangles connected to spirals. And something else that hurt to look at directly, like my eyes couldn't process what they were seeing. The other creatures started scratching the same symbols into the bark of trees, into rocks, scraping them into the dirt with their wrong hands. They were marking territory, I realized. This was their place, and I was trespassing. They began moving in a coordinated way, using their bodies to block certain directions, forcing me toward a specific trail that I hadn't noticed before. It was old, really old, and covered with those same symbols carved deep into trees. Bones hung from branches like wind chimes, but they made no sound even when the wind picked up. Small bones, bird bones mostly, but also larger ones. Human femurs stuck upright in the ground like fence posts, marking the path deeper into the woods. I didn't want to follow that trail, but they weren't giving me a choice. Every time I tried to go a different direction, one of them would step into my path, whistling those complex patterns that made my ears bleed. So I walked where they wanted me to walk, my flashlight beam dancing over more and more bones, more symbols, until I came to a small building that shouldn't have existed. It was a ranger station, but old, probably from the 1960s based on the architecture. The windows were cracked, the door hanging open, but it was in better shape than it should have been after sitting abandoned for decades. Inside, I found notebooks, dozens of them, all documenting these things I was seeing. The Whistler's own sections 47 to 51 do not engage after dark, one entry read. They take people who whistle back. Bodies never found, only bones returned arranged in patterns. There were maps showing territories, migration patterns, hunting grows, guns. One ranger had been tracking them for months before his entries stopped abruptly. Outside, the creatures surrounded the station, whistling in harmony. The sound made the windows crack. Further, and my nose started bleeding again. I found a final note from that ranger. They're teaching us their language. I understand now. I need to go with them. In the back room, I found his skeleton. Still had patches of skin and fur in places, and antlers growing from his skull. The transformation had started but never finished. They started pushing things under the door. Dead birds with human teeth in their beaks, mice with tiny antlers sprouting from their heads. Photos of other hikers, missing persons, I guess, all people who must have whistled back. Then they slid my driver's license under the door. My driver's license, which had been in my wallet in my back pocket. I checked, and my pocket had been cut open with surgical precision. My wallet was still there, but they'd gone through it, examined everything, taken just the ID. While I was standing right there, and I'd never felt a thing. At sunrise, they retreated back into the deep woods, but one stayed visible on the ridge, watching. It followed me for 8 miles as I hiked out as fast as I could, whistling every time I slowed down or tried to rest. I made it to the road and hitchhiked back to Charlotte, but something had changed. Sometimes when I'm driving deliveries or just walking around, I catch myself whistling their pattern without meaning to. When I do, I hear answering whistles in the distance, getting closer, and behind my ears, where you can't normally see, small bumps have started growing, hard little bumps that feel like bone. I don't go camping anymore. I don't even like being outside after dark, and I never, ever whistle. I'm Rosa, and I'm 26 years old. I work at a daycare center in Knoxville, Tennessee, which means I spend most of my time wiping noses and breaking up fights over crayons. It's not glamorous work, but I love those kids. Last October, my friend Michelle kept bugging me about taking a weekend trip to the mountains. She's one of those Instagram girls who's always looking for the perfect photo, you know? I wasn't really in the mood for it, but she wore me down. Said we'd go to craggy gardens, take some fall photos, maybe do a little hiking. Simple stuff. Michelle picked me up early Saturday morning in her Jeep, already talking about hashtags and lighting. I brought my old digital camera. Nothing fancy, just something my dad gave me for Christmas a few years back. The drive up was nice enough. We stopped for coffee in Burnsville, and Michelle spent 20 minutes taking pictures of her latte. I should have known then what kind of trip this was going to be. Craggy Gardens is beautiful. I'll give her that. The leaves were just starting to turn, all those reds and golds you see on postcards. We parked at the visitor area and started walking around, Michelle posing with every tree and rock formation she could find. I was actually enjoying myself, taking pictures of the real scenery instead of staged shots. That's when we found it. There was this trail that wasn't on any of our maps. We'd been hiking the main path for about an hour when Michelle spotted these old stone steps leading up the mountain. They were covered in moss, but clearly man-made, carved with precision that didn't match anything else we'd seen. Each step had symbols worn down by time, but still visible if you looked close enough. Spirals, stick figures, shapes that didn't make sense. "This is perfect," Michelle said, already pulling out her phone. "Look how mysterious this looks. My followers are going to eat that. As up!" I felt uneasy about it, honestly. Something about those steps just seemed wrong. They were too old, too deliberate, like they'd been there since before people settled these mountains. But Michelle was already climbing, so I followed. I counted as we went up. 200 steps exactly. My legs were burning by the time we reached the top. That's where we found the first garden. I'm still not sure how to describe what we saw. Picture rocks balanced in ways that shouldn't be possible. Not like those cairns hikers build, but actual sculptures. Stones floating in midair with nothing supporting them. Some were the size of basketballs, just hanging there 3 feet off the ground. Others were arranged in spirals that seemed to twist up into nothing. The air between certain stones was thick, shimmering like heat waves on summer asphalt. Michelle, being Michelle, had to touch everything. She stuck her hand right through one of those shimmering spots. I watched her hand age 40 years in 2 seconds. The skin wrinkled, spotted, her fingers gnarled like an old woman's. She started screaming, trying to pull back, but it was like the air was holding on to her. After what felt like forever but was probably just a minute, her hand snapped back and returned to normal. But she kept screaming for another 5 minutes. That should have been enough. We should have left right then. But as we kept walking, we started finding other things mixed into the stone arrangements. Modern things. A North Face backpack turned completely to stone, sitting upright like someone had just set it down. A digital watch embedded in solid rock, still showing the correct time, the display flickering. Hiking boots with feet still in them, turned to granite, but somehow still bleeding. Fresh blood. Warm blood, pooling around stone ankles. The second garden was worse. Bodies in various stages of turning to stone. A hiker frozen mid-scream, half his face flesh, half granite, his eyes still moving, still aware. Another person kneeling with hands fused to the ground, skin slowly marbling over. We could hear them breathing through stone lungs, this raspy, desperate sound. One of them managed to whisper as we passed, "Don't let the builders see you admire their work." That's when we saw them. The builders. They looked human from a distance, but everything about them was wrong. They moved like their joints were made of millstones, grinding and scraping with each step. No faces, just smooth stone that somehow still watched us. They moved by breaking apart and reforming, teleporting between spaces. Each time they put themselves back together, they incorporated new materials: dirt, bones, pieces of trash. We realized they were artists, and humans were their medium. They started following us, reaching out with hands that turned everything to stone. Trees, birds, insects, everything they touched became part of their collection. One of them brushed against Michelle's backpack, and the straps turned to granite instantly. I watched the transformation creep up toward her shoulders and grabbed her, pulling her away before it could spread. We found a journal wrapped in plastic tucked behind one of the stone arrangements. The last entry was dated yesterday. They've been building these gardens for thousands of years, it said. Each stone was once alive, still conscious, still feeling. They feed on the transition between life and mineral. The most beautiful sculptures were the ones that took longest to turn. The builders started making this sound, not singing exactly, but vibrations that traveled through stone. It made our bones ache. I felt my teeth starting to turn to pebbles, falling out and growing back as tiny rocks. Michelle's fingernails became slate, the transformation spreading up her fingers. The builders watched, tilting their heads, adjusting our positions like we were art pieces they were arranging. We kept climbing, trying to get away, but they herded us toward the peak. That's where we found the Master Garden. Thousands of stone figures from every era. Native Americans, early settlers, modern hikers, all frozen mid-motion. Their eyes followed us. Tears still flowed down their cheeks, turning to crystals as they fell. Some were arranged in family groups, reaching for each other but never quite touching. Children turned to marble, still holding stone teddy bears. The builders offered us a choice, though they didn't speak. The images just appeared in our minds. Become part of their eternal garden or bring them others. They showed us visions of their most beautiful sculptures, people who had taken centuries to turn completely. The slow transformation stretched out as long as possible. The suffering was their aesthetic. We ran. I don't remember much about getting down those steps except that Michelle kept stumbling because her left foot had turned to stone. We made it to the car somehow, drove straight home without stopping. I threw away my camera. Michelle deleted all her photos. That was 8 months ago. Michelle's foot is still stone from the ankle down. She has to wear special shoes now, tells people it's a medical condition. Sometimes I wake up with pebbles for teeth that I have to pull out before they spread to the rest of my mouth. I've never gone hiking since, and I definitely don't take pictures anymore. I still work at the daycare. The kids ask why I'm always checking to make sure all their fingers and toes are the right color, why I won't let them build with blocks anymore. I tell them it's a new safety rule, but really I just can't stand the sight of things stacked up that shouldn't be. Looking back now, I think those builders are still up there, still making their art. Sometimes I dream about all those stone people, still conscious, still feeling everything. I wonder if they dream too, or if dreaming stops when your brain turns to granite. I hope I never find out. I'm 34 years old and work at a warehouse outside Harrisburg. The job's not glamorous, but it pays decent and keeps me busy enough that I don't think too much about things. Last October, I decided I needed to get away from everything for a few days. My buddy Marcus had been telling me about Pine Grove Furnace State Park for months, said it was perfect for solo camping if you wanted to clear your head. I'd been dealing with some personal stuff, nothing dramatic, just life weighing on me. So I loaded up my truck and headed out there on a Thursday afternoon. The park's nice enough, got good trails and decent camping spots. I found a site that was a little separated from the main area. Figured I'd have some peace and quiet. Set up my tent, got a fire going, cooked some dinner. Normal camping stuff. The weather was perfect for October. Cool but not cold. Clear skies. I remember sitting by the fire that first night thinking this was exactly what I needed. No phone service, no work stress, just me in the woods. I went to bed around 10, slept pretty good until about 3 in the morning when I woke up needing to take a leak. You know how it is when you're camping. You put it off as long as you can because you don't want to leave the tent, but eventually nature calls. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. That's when I saw someone standing by a big oak tree about 30 feet from my campsite. They were just standing there, perfectly still, like they were waiting for something. I called out, "Hello?" figuring it was another camper who maybe got turned around looking for the bathroom or something. No response. The person didn't move at all, didn't even turn their head toward me. I thought maybe they had headphones in or were just being antisocial. Some people come out here to get away from other people, I get that. I did my business and went back to bed, but it bugged me a little. Who just stands motionless in the woods at 3 a.m? I figured they'd move on eventually. When I woke up around 7, the person was still there. Same exact position, same exact spot. They hadn't moved an inch in 4 hours. Now I was concerned. I thought maybe someone had gotten hurt or was having some kind of medical episode. I walked over, calling out as I got closer, asking if they were okay. But the closer I got, the more wrong everything looked. It wasn't a person at all. It was bark. Tree bark, but shaped exactly like a human being. Standing upright, unsupported, like someone had carved a perfect statue out of the trunk of that oak tree. But the detail was impossible. I could see facial features, a nose, lips, even what looked like eyelashes. The bark had formed wrinkles in clothing, individual fingers with fingernails, everything you'd see on a real person, all made from tree bark. I reached out and touched it. The bark was warm, and I swear I felt a pulse underneath, like there was a heartbeat inside this hollow tree person. I stepped back, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed there were more of them, dozens of them scattered throughout the forest. Some were in walking positions like they'd been frozen mid-step. Others were sitting on logs or rocks. A few had their arms reaching out like they were trying to grab something. Each one was different, but they all had that same impossible detail, and they all looked like they'd been caught in the middle of some action, like 3D photographs made from bark. I walked around looking at them, and the more I saw, the more disturbed I got. Some had expressions of pure terror carved into their bark faces. Others were smiling. Some just looked blank, empty. But the eyes, even though they were just bark, they felt like they were watching me. The really weird thing is their clothes. Each bark person was wearing what looked like hiking gear, but carved versions. Backpacks, boots, jackets, all made from bark, but detailed enough that I could tell they were from different time periods. Some looked like modern gear, others looked older, like from the 70s or 80s. Then I found the fresh ones. These were different. The bark was still wet, with sap leaking out like blood, and they moved, just slightly. A finger would twitch, or the head would turn an inch every few minutes. I watched one for about 10 minutes and saw it slowly shift its weight from one foot to the other. But the worst part was when I realized what I was looking at. One of the fresh bark figures was taking the shape of a hiker I'd passed on the trail yesterday. I remembered him because he had a distinctive limp, favored his left leg. The bark version had captured that limp perfectly, frozen mid-step with the weight on the right foot. I had to find that hiker. It took me about an hour of searching, but I found him. He was inside a hollow tree, maybe 50 yards from where his bark double was standing. The tree trunk had somehow opened up, and he was inside it, still alive but barely conscious. Bark was growing over his skin, replacing it inch by inch. I could see his real face through gaps in the bark that was covering him, and his eyes were wide with terror. He tried to scream when he saw me, but bark had grown over most of his mouth. The sound was muffled and horrible. I ran back to where the bark version was standing, and I watched it become more detailed as the real hiker disappeared inside that tree. When his eyes finally closed for the last time, the bark version's eyes opened. They weren't copies. They were replacements. I could see something moving inside the hollow bark shell, something wet and dark that clicked and chittered as it tested out the human shape. The bark people around the forest started walking, moving in jerky, unnatural ways like they were learning how human movement was supposed to work. That's when I realized what was happening. These things were taking hikers, pulling them into the trees through openings that shouldn't exist. The trees would seal up, and hours later, bark versions would emerge. They'd go back to the trails pretending to be hikers, but they were wrong in every way that mattered. I watched them for a while from a distance. They walked too smoothly, with no natural rhythm. They didn't breathe, and when they tried to talk to each other, they made clicking sounds between words. They were trying to lure other hikers off the trail, calling out things like, "I found something amazing over here," or "You have to see this." The worst part was that the original hikers were still conscious inside there somewhere. I could see it in the bark eyes, pleading, warning, trapped but aware. One of them managed to scrape a message in the dirt with a stick. Don't let them touch you. The touch was how it started. A handshake, a pat on the back, any skin contact. I found what looked like a whole bark family at one campsite, posed around a cold fire pit. The children figures were the worst part, playing with bark toys, captured in the middle of games they'd never finish. These things had been there for decades, building a forest of human shapes. Some of the older bark people were covered in moss, but still watching, still waiting. They were positioned strategically along all the main trails, replacing hikers systematically and spreading outward toward the populated areas. The real hikers were fertilizing the trees from inside, conscious but trapped, while their bark replacements learned to be human. I tried to burn one of them, thinking fire would destroy it. But when the flames touched the bark, it screamed with the original hiker's voice. I packed up my camp in 10 minutes and got out of there. Drove straight home and haven't been back to any state park since. Sometimes I catch myself checking mirrors, making sure I'm not hollow inside, making sure my skin doesn't feel like bark. I never reported it. Who would believe me? But I keep an eye on missing hiker reports from that area. There are more every year, and sometimes I wonder how many bark people are walking around now, clicking between their words, trying to figure out how to be human. Looking back, I think they've been there a long time, maybe since before people started hiking those trails regularly. They're patient, they're learning, and they're spreading. I still work at the warehouse, still live in the same place, but I don't go camping anymore, and I sure as hell don't shake hands with strangers who seem a little too interested in where I've been hiking. I'm 29 years old and I work as a substitute teacher here in Baltimore. The pay's not great, but it gives me summers off, which is how I ended up attempting the Maryland Challenge last August. For those who don't know, it's this hiking trail that covers about 40 miles of the Appalachian corridor through western Maryland. Most people do it in sections, but I figured I'd knock it out in 3 days of backpacking. I needed to get away from the city for a while, clear my head after a rough breakup, and prove to myself I could handle something challenging on my own. The first day went perfectly. Weather was ideal, trail was well marked, and I made good time. By late afternoon, I was looking for a place to camp for the night. The official campsites were still a few miles ahead, but I spotted what looked like a perfect spot about 50 yards off the main trail. Flat ground, a little creek nearby for water, and enough tree cover to block the wind. I've done enough backpacking to know a good site when I see one. That's when I started noticing the little things. While I was clearing sticks and rocks to set up my tent, I found a small green button. The kind you'd see on a dress shirt, nothing special. Then a shoelace, black with white tips, coiled up neat as you please beside a fallen log. A few feet away, there was a camera lens cap with Canon printed on it. At first, I figured some previous campers had been messy, left their trash behind. It happens more than you'd think, even in places this remote. But these items weren't scattered like dropped garbage. They were arranged, deliberately placed. When I stepped back and really looked at where I'd found them, they formed a perfect circle around the exact spot I'd planned to pitch my tent. The spacing was too precise to be accidental, each item exactly the same distance from the center point. I told myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe some kids had been playing here, making patterns with found objects, but the items looked old, weathered in a way that suggested they'd been there for months, maybe years. The shoelace was faded, the button had tiny rust spots around the edges, and the lens cap was scratched up from exposure to the elements. I moved my tent site about 20 feet to the left and started setting up camp. The sun was getting low, and I didn't want to be fumbling around in the dark trying to get my gear sorted. I made dinner on my little camp stove, filtered some water from the creek, and settled in for what I thought would be a peaceful night in the woods. Around midnight, I woke up to sounds outside my tent. Not animal sounds. I know what those are like. This was different. Rustling, like someone going through my backpack. My pack was hanging from a bear line about 10 feet from my tent, standard practice to keep food away from curious wildlife. But this didn't sound like a bear or raccoon. The movements were too deliberate, too careful. I lay there listening for maybe 20 minutes before I worked up the courage to unzip my tent flap and shine my flashlight toward the bear line. My pack was still hanging there, but something was definitely wrong. Items were scattered on the ground beneath it. My extra clothes, cooking gear, toiletries. But they weren't just dumped out randomly. Someone, or something, had been organizing them. My t-shirts were folded and stacked by color, dark to light, like a rainbow gradient. My socks were paired and arranged by material, cotton, wool, synthetic blends. Even my trail snacks were lined up by expiration date, earliest to latest. Everything was neat, precise, methodical. The thing that really got to me was the labeling. Each pile of items had a small piece of paper beside it, with information written in tiny, careful handwriting. No, to my handwriting. The label next to my shirts listed the cotton percentages, the countries where they were manufactured, even the specific dyes used in the fabric. Information I didn't know about my own clothes. The food labels included not just expiration dates, but nutritional breakdowns, ingredient sources, factory locations. How could anyone know these details? And who would take the time to research and catalog a stranger's belongings in the middle of the night? I gathered everything up and stuffed it back in my pack, my hands shaking. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat in my tent with my knife in my hand, listening to small sounds in the darkness. Footsteps that were too light, too quick, the soft scratch of pencil on paper, whispered conversations in a language I couldn't understand. When dawn finally came, I crawled out of my tent to pack up and get the hell out of there. That's when I saw the hillside. The entire slope above my campsite was covered in human belongings, thousands upon thousands of items, all organized into perfect sections that stretched as far as I could see into the tree line. There was a section just for shoes, arranged by size and wear pattern. Hundreds of pairs, from tiny baby booties to work boots, all showing different stages of use. Some looked recent, others were decades old. Another section held photographs, thousands of them, stuck to the trees with some kind of clear adhesive. They were sorted by the emotion shown. Smiling faces in one area, crying in another, anger, fear, love, all carefully categorized. I recognized some of the photo styles from different eras. Polaroids from the 70s, school pictures from the 80s, digital prints from smartphones. The section that made my stomach drop was the teeth. Baby teeth, adult teeth, gold fillings, all organized by size and condition. Some were still bloody at the roots. I heard movement behind me and turned to see them emerging from the woods. The collectors. They were small, maybe 4 feet tall, but their proportions were all wrong. Their arms were too long for their bodies, hanging down past their knees. Their fingers were twice the length of normal human fingers, with extra joints that let them bend in directions that made me dizzy to watch. They moved like spiders, using all 4 limbs to crawl and scuttle through their organized collection. Each one was covered in pockets, hundreds of small pockets sewn into their clothing, their skin, even their faces. The pockets bulged with items, and I could see hands constantly moving, sorting, filing, organizing. Their faces were hidden under hoods made from sewn-together socks in different colors and patterns. They didn't speak, but they communicated by showing me things. One held up a wedding ring, then showed me the finger bone it had come from. Another displayed a child's toy car, then held up a small handful of hair, blonde, cut in the style of a little boy's first haircut. Each item told a story, held a memory, contained a piece of someone's life. They were archiving human existence through our possessions. That's when I started recognizing things. My retainer from high school, which I'd lost during a camping trip 10 years ago. A key to my first apartment that had fallen off my keychain. A receipt from a restaurant I'd eaten at last month. They had been following me, collecting what I dropped for my entire life. One of them approached with a file folder. Inside were more items from my past. things I'd forgotten I'd lost. But also items from my future. An ID card with my picture but showing me 20 years older. A prescription bottle with my name but for medication I'd never heard of. Somehow, they were collecting from my timeline, past and future. They began showing me other hikers' files. Complete life histories told through objects. Some files ended abruptly. Those hikers had been collected entirely. These complete collections included organs in J. Arse, bones sorted by size, carefully preserved skin samples. They showed me a recent one, a hiker from last week, a man about my age. Every part of him was labeled, cataloged, stored in precise containers. One of the collectors gestured toward me, then toward an empty container. They wanted to make a trade. They would return my past items in exchange for current ones. But the trades were getting more personal. They wanted my baby teeth, my hair, my blood. They wanted memories. I watched as one of them held up a photo of my childhood dog, and suddenly I couldn't remember the dog's name. The more items they showed me, the more I forgot about who I was. I couldn't move to stop them. Something held me in place while their long fingers reached into my pockets, my wallet, even inside my mouth. They were gentle but persistent, taking small pieces of me to add to their archive. They led me to the mouth of a cave system I hadn't noticed before. Inside was their main collection, millions of items dating back centuries, sorted and stored with impossible precision. Some sections were active, items moving on their own, reorganizing themselves. The collected humans were conscious in their separated parts. Eyes blinking in jars, fingers tapping against glass containers, mouths trying to scream but making no sound. They offered to make me a collector, to join their work. They showed me the surgery, extending my finger joints, adding pockets to my skin, teaching me their filing system. Previous humans who had refused were in the incomplete section, still alive but separated, organized, waiting to be reassembled wrong. I don't remember exactly how I got away. I think I left everything behind, my pack, my tent, my sleeping bag. I ran through the woods in just my hiking clothes, no map, no compass, until I hit a road and flagged down a truck. The driver said I was covered in small cuts and my eyes were dilated like I was in shock. I never went back for my gear. I never reported what happened because who would believe it? I moved apartments twice since then, changed my phone number, even dyed my hair a different color. But sometimes, late at night, I catch my shadow moving independently, collecting things without me. Small items disappear from my house. Buttons, receipts, loose change. And sometimes I find them again, organized and labeled in handwriting that isn't mine. They're still collecting from me. They're still collecting from all of us. We just don't notice what goes missing until it's too late. I'm 42 years old and I've been working for the Postal Service for about 15 years now. The job's not glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me moving, which is something I've always needed. Last spring, I decided to take some vacation time and hike a section of the Appalachian Trail through Pennsylvania. I'd been dealing with some stress at work, and my doctor said I needed to get out more, do something for myself. The trail seemed like a good way to clear my head and get back in shape. I'd done day hikes before, but this was my first multi-day trek. I planned to cover about 60 miles over 5 days, staying at the trail shelters along the way. The weather was supposed to be decent, and I figured it would be nice to disconnect from everything for a while. No phone service, no deadlines, just me in the woods. I packed light but smart, good boots, a reliable sleeping bag, enough food to last the trip plus an extra day. The first day went exactly like I'd hoped. The trail was well marked, the weather held up, and I made good time. I met a few other hikers along the way, the usual mix of college kids on spring break and older folks like me trying to prove something to themselves. Everyone was friendly enough, the kind of casual conversations you have when you're all doing the same thing. By evening, I reached Pine Grove Shelter and set up for the night. There were 3 other hikers already there, and we shared stories around a small camp stove before turning in early. That's when I first noticed something was off, though I didn't realize it at the time. The 3 hikers at the shelter, 2 guys who looked to be in their 20s and a woman maybe in her 30s, they were polite when I talked to them, but their responses felt strange. Not rude, just delayed, like they had to think about what a normal person would say before answering. When I asked where they were hiking from, one of them said the beginning, which I assumed meant the southern terminus in Georgia. But when I asked how long they'd been on the trail, he said, since we started walking. Not helpful, but hikers can be quirky, so I let it slide. What really bothered me was how they moved. They'd be sitting by their packs, completely still, and then suddenly stand up and walk somewhere, to the privy, to get water, whatever, but with no warning or natural transition. Most people shift around, stretch, give some indication they're about to move. These three just went from statue still to walking, like someone had flipped a switch. The next morning they were gone before I woke up. I didn't think much of it since everyone hikes at their own pace, but over the next 2 days I kept running into hikers who acted the same way. They'd respond when you talked to them, but always with these generic, almost right answers. "How's the trail treating you?" I'd ask, and they'd say something like, "We are experiencing the trail." Not wrong exactly, but who talks like that? By the third day I was starting to pay more attention. There was this group of 5 hikers I caught up with around lunchtime, all sitting in a circle near a stream crossing. They weren't eating or talking or doing anything really, just sitting there, staring ahead. I called out hello as I approached, and all 5 heads turned toward me at exactly the same time, like they were connected somehow. "Beautiful day for hiking," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yes," they said in unison. Not one of them saying yes, and the others agreeing. All 5 saying it at the exact same moment in the exact same tone. "We are hiking." I felt my skin crawl, but I forced a laugh. "Well, that's what we're all here for, right?" They didn't respond to that, just turned their heads back to staring at nothing and went completely still again. I filled my water bottle quickly and kept moving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. When I looked back from about 50 yards up the trail, they were gone. Not walking away, not packing up, just gone. That night I stayed at Darlington Shelter, and that's where everything really went sideways. I got there around 5 in the evening, and there were already 6 hikers settled in. The same 5 from the stream crossing, plus one more, a younger guy with expensive gear who looked like he'd just started hiking that morning. The 5 were arranged in their sleeping bags in a perfect line, lying on their backs with their eyes open, staring at the shelter ceiling. The new guy was sitting on the edge of the platform, organizing his pack. "Hey," I said to him as I claimed a spot, "how long have they been like that?" He looked over at the 5, then back at me with this confused expression. "Like what?" I gestured toward them. They hadn't moved or blinked since I'd arrived. Just, lying there. "Are they okay?" The guy looked again, and I watched his face change. The confusion drained away, replaced by something blank and empty. When he turned back to me, his eyes took a second too long to focus, like he was remembering he was supposed to look at me when he spoke. "We are resting," he said in that same flat tone. My blood went cold. I'd watched it happen. Whatever was wrong with the others, it had just taken him too. In real time, right in front of me. I spent that night wide awake, watching them. None of the 6 moved for hours. They didn't shift positions, didn't adjust their sleeping bags, didn't even seem to breathe sometimes. Around midnight, I got brave enough to check if they were actually alive. I walked over to the closest one and watched his chest. He was breathing, but so slowly and rhythmically it looked mechanical. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I checked my watch. All 6 of them sat up simultaneously. No gradual waking up, no stretching or yawning. 1 second they were lying down, the next they were sitting upright. Then they stood up, still in perfect unison, and walked out of the shelter into the dark woods. I grabbed my headlamp and followed them, staying far enough back to avoid being seen. They moved through the trees without using any lights, never stumbling or hesitating, like they could see perfectly in the dark. About a quarter mile from the shelter, they stopped in a small clearing and arranged themselves in a circle. That's when I saw what they really were. My headlamp beam hit them from behind, and I could see through them. Not completely transparent, but translucent, like they were made of thick fog. And inside each one, moving around in their chest cavities, was something dark and shapeless. It looked like smoke, but with purpose, constantly shifting and pulsing. The things inside were animating the bodies, wearing them like clothing. I watched in horror as one of the entities pressed against the inside of its host's skin, stretching the face into an expression that was almost human, but not quite right. Another one was making its host practice walking, but the steps were too precise, too measured. They were learning how to be human, but they didn't understand the small imperfections that make us real. I backed away as quietly as I could and made it to the shelter without them noticing. At dawn, they returned and resumed their positions like nothing had happened, but now I could see the wrongness clearly. When they moved, it was like watching marionettes operated by someone who'd only heard walking described secondhand. When they spoke, the voices came from the right place, but with the wrong rhythm. I packed up and left as soon as it was light enough to see the trail. I didn't say goodbye. Over the next day and a half, I encountered more of them. Different stages of infection, I guess. Some still had traces of the original person fighting for Contros. I watched one hiker's face flicker between human expressions of panic and that terrible blank stare. At one point, he looked right at me and mouthed, "Help me," before his face went slack. Again, and the thing inside took over completely. The worst part was finding the empty ones. 3 times I came across discarded bodies by the trail, human-shaped but deflated, like someone had let all the air out of them. They were still warm. Their faces were frozen in expressions of absolute terror, and their eyes were still conscious somehow, still aware, tracking movement but unable to speak or move. The things weren't just randomly taking people. They were learning, practicing, getting better at being human. I started noticing them copying my movements, but always 3 or 4 seconds delayed. If I adjusted my pack strap, one of them would adjust theirs a few seconds later in the exact same way. If I stopped to drink water, they'd go through the motions with empty bottles. They were building something. An army of fake humans, getting more convincing with each person they took. I didn't make it to my planned endpoint. On the 4th day, I felt myself getting lighter, like my insides were dissolving. I could think clearly, but my thoughts felt smaller somehow, simpler. I caught myself starting to mimic the movements of other hikers instead of walking naturally. That's when I got off the trail and never looked back. I drove straight home and didn't hike again for months. Even now, 2 years later, I stick to day hikes on well-populated trails. I check myself constantly, making sure I can still feel my heart beating, that my thoughts are still complex and messy and human. Sometimes I catch myself walking too rhythmically, and I have to consciously scuff my feet or stumble a little to feel normal again. The worst part is the dreams. At least twice a week, I wake up at 2:47 a.m. with the overwhelming urge to walk outside. I've caught myself getting dressed and heading for the door before I remember what I am and where I belong. Each time it's harder to stop myself. I never reported what I saw. Who would believe it? But sometimes I check missing person reports from that area of Pennsylvania. There are always a few hikers who just vanish without a trace, and I wonder if they're still out there somewhere, walking the trails at night, practicing being human and getting better at it every day. I still work for the Postal Service. I still live in the same house. But I'm not the same person who went into those woods. Part of me is still there, I think, walking in circles at 2:47 a.m., learning how to be something I'm not. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I'm trying to fall asleep, I swear I can feel something dark moving around inside my chest, just under my ribs, patient and waiting. I'm 44 years old and I manage a grocery store in Dayton, Ohio. Been doing it for about 12 years now, same routine every day. Inventory, staff schedules, dealing with suppliers. It's not exciting work, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy since my divorce 3 years back. The one bright spot in all this has been my relationship with my son Tyler. He's 16 now, and honestly, I was worried we were drifting apart like a lot of fathers and teenage sons do. Between his school, my work, and just life in general, We barely saw each other except for dinner and weekend errands. That's why when Tyler asked if we could do a hiking trip for his birthday, just the two of us, no phones, no distractions, I jumped at the chance. He'd been researching trails online and found this area near Grayson Highlands in Virginia. Said it looked perfect for what he called real camping, not the kind with bathrooms and picnic tables. I'll be honest, I hadn't done serious hiking since I was in my 20s, but seeing Tyler that excited about spending time with his old man, there was no way I was saying no. We drove down on a Thursday in early October. The weather was perfect. Cool mornings, warm afternoons, and the leaves were just starting to turn. Tyler had printed out maps and trail guides, planned our whole route. He was more organized about this trip than I'd seen him be about anything in years. We parked at the trailhead around noon, shouldered our packs, and headed into the woods. For the first time in months, Tyler was talking to me. Really talking. About school, about his friends, about this girl he liked, but was too nervous to ask out. It felt like I was getting my son back. The first day went exactly like you'd hope a father-son camping trip would go. We made good time on the trail, set up camp near a creek, cooked hot dogs over the fire, and stayed up later than we shot. I'd have just talking. Tyler even asked me about what I was like when I was his age, something he hadn't shown interest in for years. I went to sleep that night thinking this might be one of the best decisions I'd ever made as a parent. Day 2 started just as well. We broke camp early, had coffee and instant oatmeal, and were back on the trail by 8. The path wound through some of the most beautiful forest I'd ever seen. Tall oaks and maples with this thick understory that filtered the sunlight into these golden beams. Tyler was walking ahead of me, pointing out different birds and plants he recognized from his research. The kid had really done his homework. We'd been hiking for maybe 3 hours when it happened. Tyler was about 10 feet ahead of me, stepping over what looked like an old fallen log, when I heard him yelp and stumble forward. When I caught up to him, he was sitting on the ground, holding his right foot. "Dad, I think I stepped on something," he said, and his voice had this weird quality to it. Not quite pain, but something else I couldn't identify. I knelt down next to him and saw what looked like a piece of rusted metal sticking up from the ground where he'd stepped. It was dark, maybe 6 inches long, shaped like an old railroad spike. Tyler's hiking boot had a clean hole punched right through the sole. "Jesus, Tyler, let me see your foot," I said, helping him pull his boot off. That's when things got weird. The spike had gone clean through his boot and deep into his foot. I could see the puncture wound clearly. But here's the thing that still bothers me to this day. It wasn't bleeding, not a drop of blood. Instead, there was this thick, clear liquid seeping out of the wound. It looked almost like tree sap, and it smelled strange, like pine needles mixed with something metallic, like old pennies. "How does it feel?" I asked, pulling out my first aid kit. Tyler looked at me with this confused expression. "It doesn't hurt, Dad. Actually, it feels warm. Kind of good, like drinking hot tea, but in my foot." I cleaned the wound as best I could, but that clear sap kept leaking out. When I tried to bandage it, the liquid seemed to dissolve the adhesive. Tyler said the warmth was spreading up his leg, and when I looked closely at his skin, I could see these thin black lines following the warmth. They looked like veins, but they weren't following his normal blood vessels. They were creating new pathways, branching out in patterns I'd never seen before. Within 20 minutes, those black lines had spread from his foot to his knee, pulsing with his heartbeat. But the strangest part was the sound. I swear I could hear something inside his leg, like roots pushing through wet soil, this soft, crackling, grinding noise that seemed to come from inside his bones. Tyler's eyes changed first. His pupils, which had always been perfectly round, started to develop these vertical splits like cracks in tree bark. When he blinked, I could see the pupils trying to close, but those cracks stayed visible. "Dad," he said, and his voice sounded different, deeper somehow. "Dad, I can hear things." "What kind of things?" "Underground. There's water running under the ground and insects talking to each other in the trees. And something else, something bigger. It's like the roots under the forest are all connected, and they're talking. I thought maybe he was going into shock from the injury, so I started packing up our gear to get him out of there. But Tyler stood up and walked to a nearby tree. He pressed his ear against the bark and smiled. "Dad, the mountain is lonely. It's been lonely for a very long time. It wants friends." The black veins had reached his chest by then, and his breathing had changed. Instead of normal in and out breaths, he was taking these long, slow inhales and even longer exhales, like he was photosynthesizing. In direct sunlight, his skin was taking on a greenish tint, and I swear I could smell oxygen being produced, that fresh, clean smell you get after rain. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m, and Tyler wasn't in his sleeping bag. I found him about 50 feet from our campsite, sitting cross-legged on the ground with his hands pushed deep into the soil up to his wrists. He was making these soft, moaning sounds, but they weren't sounds of pain. They were sounds of pleasure, like he was getting some kind of satisfaction from having his hands in the dirt. "Tyler, what are you doing?" He looked up at me, and in the moonlight his eyes reflected light like an animal's. "It feels so good, Dad. The earth is warm, and it's hungry. It wants to share." When I got him to pull his hands out of the soil, I saw that the puncture wound on his foot had changed completely. Instead of a simple hole, it had become this circular opening with rings around it, like the rings inside a tree trunk. And as I watched, these thin white filaments started emerging from the opening, each one searching, reaching toward the soil, toward water, toward anything organic and dead. I packed up our camp right then and there, despite Tyler's protests that we needed to stay, that the mountain wasn't finished with him yet. But as we hiked back toward the trailhead in the dark, those white filaments kept growing, and I realized they were responding to other hikers on the trail. They'd turn and point in directions where I couldn't see anything, but where Tyler insisted he could sense people hundreds of yards away. Tyler's teeth started loosening during that night hike. By dawn, half of them had fallen out, only to be replaced by these sharp wooden thorns that kept growing even as I watched. His tongue had split into multiple tendrils that he kept flicking out to taste the air, and when he spoke, his voice had this rustling quality like wind through leaves. That's when we encountered the others. They emerged from the woods as the sun came up, other hikers in various stages of the same transformation Tyler was going through. There was a woman whose entire lower body had become a root system, dragging herself along with her arms. A kid who couldn't have been more than 12, his face a horrifying blend of human features and tree bark, breathing through holes in his cheeks that opened and closed like gills. They didn't speak with words. Instead, they released these clouds of spores that formed patterns in the air, and somehow Tyler understood what they were saying. He told me they'd all been changed by the same thing, that their root systems were connected underground and they shared a single consciousness now. "Dad," Tyler said, and he was crying, but the tears were that same clear sap. "I can feel every footstep that's been on this trail for the last 200 years. I can feel Cherokee tears and settlers' blood. I can feel every death, every birth, every prayer that's happened in these mountains. It hurts, Dad. It all hurts so much." His skin was splitting along those black vein lines, revealing amber sap that moved like blood. Inside the sap, I could see tiny seeds, each one containing something that looked disturbingly like Tyler's DNA. The transformation accelerated after that. His spine started extending, pushing through the skin of his back like branches. Each vertebra sprouted small twigs with leaves that rustled without any wind. When he screamed, and he screamed a lot, it was this horrible two-toned sound of human agony mixed with the creaking of old wood. The other transformed hikers circled us, not threatening, just waiting. They were making this sound that might have been singing, frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "Dad, please," Tyler begged me. "Burn me before it finishes. I can feel myself disappearing into something ancient and hungry. Please." I lit a match from our camping supplies, but the moment the flame appeared, every tree within a mile started screaming. The sound was so loud and so wrong that 3 of my teeth cracked and blood poured from both ears. The transformed hikers started weeping sap, reaching their root fingers toward Tyler protectively. "Dad, cut the taproot," Tyler managed to say through his wooden teeth. "Under my ribs, please. Cut the taproot." I used my camping knife to cut where he indicated and found it. This thick, pulsing root about as wide as my wrist, disappearing into his body and connected to something massive underground. When I cut through it, Tyler screamed, and something deep inside the mountain screamed back. Black sap exploded everywhere, burning my skin like acid and smelling like death that was older than human civilization. Tyler collapsed, suddenly human again, but dying. The roots retreated into his wounds like they were being sucked back underground. The other transformed people went berserk, their human parts trying to attack me while their root parts held them back, creating this horrible internal struggle. I carried Tyler for 6 miles while things underground followed us. Roots burst through the trail trying to grab us, leaving holes that seemed to go down forever. Every step felt like we were being chased by something vast and patient and utterly alien. We made it to the road and Tyler survived, but he's different now. He won't eat vegetables. Says he can hear them scream when they're cut. Sometimes his scars open up and leak that clear sap, and when they do, every plant in our house turns toward him like flowers following the sun. I moved us to a different state, found a new job, changed our phone numbers. But Tyler still wakes up some nights, pressing his ear to the floor, listening to something I can't hear. He tells me the mountain remembers us, that it's still lonely, and that someday it's going to call us back. I've never told this story to anyone before today, but Tyler's 18 now, and he's Tal's king about going to college in Virginia. He says he has dreams about those woods, about completing what was started. I'm scared that one day I'm going to wake up and find him gone, driving back to that trail to finish what that spike began. To this day, I can't look at tree roots without thinking about what's really underneath our feet, connecting things in ways we were never meant to understand. I'm 28 years old and work retail at Target, which isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills. Last year, I was going through some pretty rough depression, the kind where getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. My therapist suggested I try hiking to help with my mental health, said something about nature and endorphins. I'd been documenting my recovery journey on TikTok, nothing fancy, just real talk about depression, and somehow managed to get about 8,000 followers who seemed genuinely supportive. So, when I decided to hike part of the Appalachian Trail through Maryland, I figured I'd document that too. Maybe help other people see that you can push through the dark stuff. I started at the Maryland section near Harper's Ferry, planning to do a few days solo. My parents weren't thrilled about me going alone, but honestly, being alone was kind of the point. I needed to prove to myself I could handle things on my own again. The first morning, I hiked up to Annapolis Rock for the sunrise. It was one of those perfect moments. Golden light, rolling hills stretching forever, that crisp mountain air that makes you feel like you can breathe properly for the first time in months. I filmed it, posted it with the caption, "Nature heals everything," and felt genuinely hopeful. Within seconds of posting, I got a comment from a user called @WatchesFromPines. Just 4 words. Stop broadcasting our home. I almost deleted it. You get weird comments on social media all the time. But something made me click on their profile. The picture was my face, exactly my face, like they'd screenshotted one of my videos. Except the eyes were wrong. They were holes, and through those holes, I could see forest. Dark trees and shadows where my eyes should have been. I reported the account and blocked them, tried to shake off the creepy feeling. Probably just some troll using face swap technology to mess with people. But that night in my tent, I kept thinking about those hollow eyes, how the forest behind them looked familiar, like the woods I was sleeping in right then. The next morning, I filmed my usual check-in video talking about how the fresh air was helping my mood. But when I watched it back before posting, something was wrong. For just single frames, so quick you'd miss them if you weren't looking, my face would morph into something else. something with too wide smile and those same hollow eyes. I rewatched it frame by frame on my phone, and sure enough, every few seconds there'd be one frame where I looked wrong, like something else was wearing my face over its own. I almost didn't post it. But my followers were expecting updates, and the weird frames were so brief that maybe nobody else would notice. I was wrong. Within minutes, comments started flooding in. "Who's that behind you?" "Melissa, why do you look different?" "There's someone else in your video." I watched the video again, but there was nobody behind me when I filmed it. I was alone on the trail. That's when I noticed my phone was acting strange. It showed 100% battery, even though I'd been using it constantly all day. And it was hot. Not warm like phones get, but fever hot, like it had a temperature. I tried turning it off, but it wouldn't respond. The screen stayed on, camera app open, like it was watching me. Then I started getting airdrops from nobody. Photos would just appear in my camera roll, pictures of me from angles that were impossible. One showed me from above, like someone was in the trees looking down. Another was taken from inside my mouth, looking out at my face from behind my teeth. My hands were shaking as I deleted them, but they kept coming, each one from a different, impossible angle. That night, I woke up to notifications blowing up my phone. Apparently, I'd posted a TikTok at exactly 3:33 a.m. I was awake, or thought I was, but I had no memory of posting anything. The video showed me sleepwalking out of my tent, moving through the forest in the dark. In the video, I was building something from sticks, arranging rocks in patterns, carving symbols into trees with my fingernails until they bled. But when I checked my hands that morning, there was no dirt, no blood, no evidence I'd left my sleeping bag. The comments on the sleepwalking video made my stomach drop. "Melissa, your eyes are black. Why are you smiling like that? That's not you." I downloaded the video and watched it in slow motion. In the darkness, you could barely make out my face, but there was definitely something wrong with my expression. I was smiling, but it wasn't my smile. It was too wide, too knowing. And when I slowed it down even more, I swear I could see something else underneath my face, like a mask that didn't quite fit right. My phone camera started turning on by itself, live streaming to all my social media platforms simultaneously. I'd be hiking or setting up camp, and suddenly I'd get notifications that I was live on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Everywhere at once, hundreds of viewers watching me begged the camera to stop while it just kept recording. The worst part was hearing my own voice laughing back at me through the phone speaker, but I wasn't laughing. When I covered the camera with my hand, the screen would show my reflection, but my reflection was doing different things. It would wave at the viewers, mouth words I wasn't saying, beckon people to come find me. The comments during these live streams were terrifying. People were taking screenshots, saving my location data, saying they were driving to Maryland to meet me. In their profile pictures, their eyes were solid black, and they were all smiling the same too wide smile. My follower count was exploding, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. But when I looked at the new followers, their profile pictures were all variations of my face. Some with the hollow eyes, some with the wrong smile, some that looked like pictures of me I'd never taken. They all commented the same thing at the exact same second. "Join us on the trail." Then I started seeing videos from my followers driving toward Maryland, hundreds of them streaming their journeys from all over the country. They all had that same black-eyed stare, that same smile. Their own families were commenting on their videos, begging them to come home, asking what was wrong with them. But they just kept driving, kept streaming, kept smiling my smile. The phone was changing. I first noticed it when I tried to put it in my pocket and couldn't let go. The case had somehow fused with my palm, skin growing over the edges like it was healing around the device. I could feel every notification as physical sensations. Each like was a needle in my spine, every comment a whisper in my ear. The screen started showing me things before they happened. Hikers I'd meet hours later. But in the preview videos, they were always dead, arranged in the same stick patterns I'd been building in my sleep. The thing in my phone started talking to me directly, using voices I recognized. My mom's voice telling me everything would be okay if I just kept posting. My ex-boyfriend's voice saying he'd take me back if I got more followers. My therapist's voice explaining that this was all part of my healing process. The voices were perfect, exactly right, but I knew they weren't real because my phone had been dead for days in terms of actual cellular service. I posted one last video, a complete breakdown, sobbing, begging people to stop watching, to go home, to leave me alone. It got 2 million views in the first hour. The comments were coordinates, all pointing to exactly where I was standing. People were coming. All of them. Following the GPS data from my streams. I started seeing them through the trees. Hundreds of people with their pH. Ones out, moving wrong, like their phones were controlling their bodies instead of the other way around. When they spoke, my voice came out of their mouths. Nature heals everything. Nature heals everything. They were building something from sticks and phones, a massive structure that looked like a cell tower but made of human bones and screaming devices. When I looked at their phone screens as they got closer, they all showed the same thing, me. But I was the thing wearing my face. I was standing in the center of their structure, arms spread wide, smiling that impossible smile, while thousands of viewers watched and thousands more drove through the night to join us. I ripped the phone from my hand. It took skin and muscle with it, leaving my palm raw and bleeding. But even as I ran, I could hear the followers' phones streaming my escape in real time, comments directing the thing exactly where I was. "She's heading north, by the creek. Cut her off at the road." I made it out somehow. Flagged down a park ranger, got a ride to the hospital, told them I'd had an accident with my camping gear. But I can't use technology anymore. Any device with a camera recognizes me, starts streaming automatically. Sometimes I see my face on other people's phones when I'm in public. Still hiking, still smiling, still posting videos with the caption, "Nature heals everything." I work at a different target now, in a different state. I don't have social media anymore, obviously. My old followers are still out there somewhere, and sometimes I wonder if they ever made it home. I keep my head down, pay cash for everything, avoid cameras. Because somewhere in those mountains, there's still a version of me posting content, gathering followers, spreading whatever that thing was to more and more people. The worst part? My depression actually is better now. Turns out when you've seen something that shouldn't exist wearing your face and controlling thousands of people through their phones, regular human problems seem pretty manageable. I guess nature really does heal everything, just not the way I expected. I'm 28 years old and I work retail at Target, which honestly isn't the life I thought I'd have at this point. Last spring I was going through a really rough patch with my depression, and my therapist suggested I try hiking to help clear my head. I'd always been kind of active on social media. Nothing crazy, just posting pictures of my life, you know? But when I started documenting my hiking trips on TikTok, something clicked. People were actually responding to my videos about mental health and recovery. I wasn't trying to become an influencer or anything, I just wanted to share what was helping me get better. By the time I decided to tackle a section of the Appalachian Trail in Maryland, I had about 8,000 followers who were genuinely cheering me on. It felt good to have people rooting for me, especially since I'd been pretty isolated for months. The plan was simple. Hike for 4 days along the Maryland section, camp out, and document the whole thing. I figured it would be perfect content for my recovery journey series. The first 2 days went exactly like I hoped. I posted videos of the sunrise from Annapolis Rock, talked about how being in nature was helping me process things, shared some of the trail snacks I was trying. Normal hiking stuff. The views were incredible, and I remember feeling genuinely happy for the first time in months. My followers were loving it too. Lots of supportive comments, people sharing their own stories about getting outdoors for their mental health. Then I posted that sunrise video on my second morning with the caption, "Nature heals everything." I was sitting on the rocks, feeling proud of myself for making it this far, and I thought it captured the moment perfectly. Within maybe 30 seconds of posting, I got a comment from a user called @WatchesFromPines that just said, "Stop broadcasting our home." I clicked on their profile to say, what their deal was, thinking maybe they were some kind of leave no trace purist or something. But their profile picture made my stomach drop. It was my face. Not like a screenshot from one of my videos. It was my exact face, but the eyes were just black holes. And through those holes I could see trees and forest, like someone had cut eye holes in a photo and held it up in front of a camera in the woods. I tried to report the account, but when I went back to find the comment, it was gone. The profile was gone too. I figured maybe it was just some weird bot or troll that got taken down quickly, but it left me feeling uneasy. I almost didn't post my next video, but I talked myself out of being paranoid. This was helping people and helping me. I wasn't going to let some creep ruin that. The next video I filmed was just me talking about the trail while I walked, nothing special. But when I watched it back before posting, something was wrong. For just single frames, like if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss it completely. My face kept changing, like morphing into something else. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just a glitch in the app. But I watched it again in slow motion, and it was definitely there. In those split-second flashes, my face looked wrong. The proportions were off, the smile was too wide, and the eyes were solid black. I deleted that video and tried filming again, but the same thing happened. No matter how many times I recorded, those single-frame glitches were there. I ended up posting it anyway because I didn't want to disappoint my followers, and honestly, I convinced myself that nobody else would notice. But they did notice. The comments started rolling in almost immediately. "Who's that behind you? Melissa, check the background of your video. There's someone in the trees." I watched the video over and over, but I couldn't see what they were talking about. There was nobody behind me when I was filming. I was completely alone on the trail. That's when I started noticing my phone was acting weird. The battery stayed at 100% no matter how much I used it, which should have been impossible since I was streaming and posting constantly, and it was getting hot. Not just warm like phones do when you use them a lot, but actually hot, like fever hot. Sometimes I couldn't even hold it without it burning my hands. Then the airdrops started happening. I'd be sitting by my tent at night, and my phone would buzz with an airdrop notification from unknown. The photos were always of me, but taken from angles that didn't make sense. Like someone would have had to be standing right next to me, or inside my tent, or floating above me to get those shots. One photo showed me from inside my own mouth, looking out like the camera was somehow behind my teeth. I stopped accepting the airdrops, but they kept coming. My phone would buzz every few minutes all night long. I tried turning it off, but it would turn itself back on. I tried airplane mode, but somehow the airdrops still came through. The worst part was that my TikToks started posting themselves. Every night at exactly 3:33 a.m., a new video would go live on my account. I'd wake up in the morning to hundreds of notifications, and there would be a video of me that I never remembered filming. In these videos, I was sleepwalking around my campsite, doing strange things, building stick figures out of branches, arranging rocks in patterns, carving symbols into trees with my camping knife. But when I woke up, I was always in my sleeping bag and my hands were clean. No dirt under my fingernails. No memory of any of it. The comments on these videos were getting scary. "Melissa, your eyes are black in this one. Why are you smiling like that? This doesn't look like you." I'd download the videos to my phone and watch them in slow motion, and that's when I saw it clearly. In the videos, it wasn't quite me. It was something else wearing my face, but not getting the details right. The movements were too fluid, too graceful. And in the slow motion playback, I could see what looked like another face underneath mine, something angular and wrong. By the third night, my phone camera started turning on by itself. Not just taking pictures, but live streaming to every platform I had accounts on. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, even my old Twitter account I never used. I'd be trying to sleep, and suddenly I'd hear my own voice coming from the phone, but I wasn't talking. The camera would be pointed at me, and on the screen I could see my reflection, but the reflection was doing different things than I was. While I was lying still, trying to figure out what was happening, my reflection would be sitting up, waving at the camera, beckoning viewers to come find me. The live streams were getting thousands of viewers. People in the comments were saying they were driving to Maryland to meet me. They'd post photos of themselves in their cars, but in every photo their eyes were solid black and they were smiling too wide, just like my reflection. I'd beg the camera to stop, but it would just laugh with my voice. Then my followers started changing. I'd check my follower list, and their profile pictures were all becoming variations of my face, not exactly the same as that first creepy profile, but close, all slightly wrong versions of me. And they started commenting in perfect unison, posting the exact same words at the exact same second. Join us on the trail. I started seeing videos posted by my followers of them walking toward Maryland. Hundreds of them, all streaming their journey, all with those black eyes and my smile. Their families were commenting on their videos, begging them to come home, asking what was wrong with them. But they just kept walking and streaming, getting closer. That's when my phone started physically changing. The case began to feel warm and soft, and when I looked closely, I could see it was fusing with my hand. The plastic was merging with my skin, growing into my palm like some kind of organic parasite. I could feel every notification like a needle going straight into my spine. Every like, every comment, every view was physically painful. The screen started showing me things before they happened. I'd see videos of hikers I was going to meet hours later, but in these preview videos, they were always dead, arranged in the same stick figure patterns I'd been making while sleepwalking. Then I'd meet them alive on the trail, and I'd know exactly how they were going to die. The thing in my phone started talking to me, using voices of people I knew. My mom's voice, my ex-boyfriend's voice, my therapist's voice, all perfectly mimicked. "Give us more followers and we'll let you go," it would say. "Just keep posting. Keep bringing them to us." When I had my breakdown on camera, the video got 2 million views in an hour. It was spreading faster than anything I'd ever posted. The comments weren't supportive anymore. They were coordinates, all pointing to exactly where I was. My followers were coming for me, all of them, controlled through their screens. I started seeing them through the trees. Hundreds of people, all holding their phones out, recording everything. They moved wrong, like marionettes being controlled by strings, and those strings were connected to their phones. When they spoke, it was my voice coming out of their mouths, all saying, "Nature heals everything," in perfect unison. They were building something in a clearing near my campsite, a tower made of sticks and phones and what looked like bones. All their phones were connected to it somehow, and all the screens showed the same thing, me, but I was the thing wearing my face. When I looked at my phone one last time, the screen had cracked and underneath wasn't circuits or electronics. It was organic, breathing. I could see veins and what looked like a tiny beating heart, and when I looked closer, there were dozens of tiny eyes looking back at me. The followers reached my campsite, and each one of them held out their phone to connect it to mine. All the phones were merging into something larger, hungrier, still streaming everything to millions of viewers. The massive phones and flesh spoke with all their voices at once. "We have 10 million viewers now." I ripped the phone from my hand. It took skin and muscle with it, left me bleeding, but I ran. I could hear them behind me, crashing through the woods, but their phones kept live streaming my escape. Comments were coming in real time, telling the thing exactly where I was. "She's heading north. By the creek. She's bleeding." I made it to the parking area and got in my car. Drove until I hit cell service, then kept driving until I was back home. But I can't use any technology anymore. Any phone, any computer, any screen recognizes me and tries to start the stream again. I see my face sometimes on other people's phones when I'm out in public. I'm still there, still hiking, still smiling, still posting. Nature heals everything. I work different shifts now, try to avoid people with phones. My depression came back worse than before, but I can't document my recovery anymore. I can't share my story online. I can't connect with people who might be going through the same thing. Sometimes I wonder how many of those 10 million viewers are real people, and how many are just the thing wearing other faces, spreading to other platforms, finding new hikers to add to its collection. I never went back to the mountains, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. I'm 35 years old, and I work as a pharmacy technician in Camden. Last summer, I finally got my divorce papers signed, and honestly, I needed to prove something to myself, that I could handle things on my own with my kids, Emma and Luis. Emma's 10, Luis just turned 7, and they'd been through enough with their dad leaving. I wanted to show them we could still have adventures, just the three of us. So I planned this camping trip to Fingerboard Shelter in New Jersey. Nothing too crazy, just a weekend in the woods where we could roast marshmallows and I could feel like I had my life together for once. I'd never taken them camping alone before, but how hard could it be, right? Pack some food, set up a tent, keep them from wandering off. The weather was perfect that weekend in August, and the kids were actually excited instead of complaining about leaving their tablets behind. We got to the shelter around 3 p.m. on Friday, and there was already another family there. The Thompsons, they said, Robert and Patricia, with 3 kids who looked maybe 8, 10, and 12. They had this whole elaborate setup, matching REI gear, a camp kitchen that looked like it cost more than my car payment, everything coordinated down to their hiking boots. Robert came over right away to introduce himself, shaking my hand with this big smile. His hand was ice cold, even though it was 80 degrees out and kind of sticky, like when you touch raw chicken and don't wash it off completely. "First time camping alone with the kids?" he asked, still holding my hand a little too long. I nodded, wiping my palm on my jeans afterward. "We'd be happy to help if you need anything. We're practically professionals at this point." The thing that struck me right away was how perfect they all were. Not just their gear, but the way they moved together, like they were synchronized. When Patricia called for dinner, all 3 kids stopped what they were doing at exactly the same moment and walked to the picnic table in single file. No arguing, no 5 more minutes, Mom, nothing, just immediate compliance. And Patricia herself, she smiled constantly. I watched her for a full hour while the kids played, and she never stopped smiling. Not once. More importantly, I never saw her blink. Not even when the wind picked up and blew dust around. Emma noticed it too, tugging on my sleeve and whispering, "Mom, why does that lady stare so much?" Dinner time was when things got really weird. We were eating separately, but close enough that I could see them clearly. They all chewed in perfect unison. Same number of chews, same pause, same swallow, like they were following sheet music or something. Robert would take a bite, and exactly 2 seconds later, Patricia would take hers. Then each kid in descending age order. 27 chews every single time. I counted. Luis was sitting on my lap, picking at his hot dog, when he suddenly whispered in my ear, "Mommy, why does that family smell like the fish that died in our tank?" That's when I really focused on the smell. There was definitely something underneath their heavy pine-scented cologne or soap or whatever it was. Something sweet and rotten, like meat left out too long, but also chemical, like the formaldehyde smell from the funeral home where my grandmother had her service. I tried to shake it off. Maybe they'd been fishing earlier, or had some kind of medical condition. People can't help how they smell, and I was probably just being paranoid because I was stressed about managing everything alone. But then Emma woke me up at midnight, shaking my shoulder in the tent. "Mom," she whispered, "they're standing around our tent, holding hands." I unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek out, and there they were. All 5 Thompsons in a perfect circle, around our tent holding hands, their heads tilted back toward the sky with their mouths wide open. Just standing there, swaying slightly, making this low humming sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. The sound hurt my ears, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but deeper. They stood there for 4 hours. I know because I watched the whole time, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loud. Emma and Luis both stayed awake too, pressed against me, not making a sound. At exactly 4 a.m., they stopped humming, dropped hands, and walked back to their tent like nothing had happened. At dawn, Robert knocked on our tent. "Good morning. Hope you slept well. Beautiful night, wasn't it? Like we never left, right?" But the thing was, they had left. I'd watched them go back to their tent hours earlier, and Patricia's face was wrong. The skin was loose on one side, sagging down from her cheekbone. I could see what looked like another face underneath, with different colored eyes. When she smiled at me, the top face smiled, but the one underneath didn't. Throughout Saturday, their skin kept getting looser. All of them. It was like watching clothes that didn't fit properly, bunching and sagging in weird places. The youngest kid's leg skin had gathered around his ankle like when your sock slides down into your shoe. When they walked, I could hear liquid sloshing, like there was water between their skin and whatever was underneath. The smell got worse too. That sweet rot smell mixed with what smelled like medical preservatives. Emma saw Patricia's entire back split open while she was bending over the camp stove, something gray and wet visible inside before the skin snapped back into place. They kept trying to get close to my kids, asking them to play with the Thompson children. The game involved the Thompson kids removing their fingers like gloves, showing Emma and Luis how easy it was. Underneath were different fingers, too long with too many joints, covered in clear mucus. When one of them touched Luis on the shoulder, it left a burn mark that blistered immediately. Luis screamed, and I grabbed both kids, pulling them away. "Just playing," Robert said, his voice different now, wetter. "Kids heal so fast." By dinner on Saturday, Robert's face fell off completely. Just slid right off like a mask while he was eating, landing in his beans. He calmly picked it up and held it against his head with one hand, while continuing to eat with the other. Underneath was something smooth and gray with pulsing veins. No features except mouths that opened randomly all over it, filled with spiral rows of tiny teeth. Patricia laughed, but it was 3 different voices layered together. "Children grow so fast, don't they? They need new clothes so often." She reached for Emma with hands that had shed their skin completely, revealing what looked like tentacle fingers that moved independently. Emma screamed and ran behind me. The Thompson children started removing their skins voluntarily, like taking off wet clothes. What came out was impossible to describe. Bodies that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, moving like octopi but with human intelligence behind their actions. They reached for my children with appendages that changed shape as I watched. "Your skins are so fresh," they said in unison, surrounding us. Ours have lasted 3 years, but they're wearing out, getting thin. They showed us a pile behind their tent that I hadn't noticed before. Dozens of skins from families of all sizes, men, women, children, babies. The skins were still moving slightly, making soft, whimpering sounds. "We're old," the thing that had been Robert explained, its gray mass pulsing as it spoke through multiple mouths. "Older than these mountains. Every few years we need new skins to walk among humans, to feed on their happiness, their warmth. Children's skins last longest. So full of life, so much potential." They began circling us, and I noticed they were Seka, reading something, a clear fluid that made the air shimmer. Where it touched my legs, they started going numb. Emma and Luis were getting drowsy, their resistance fading. The things began stretching and contracting, showing us how they'd fit inside our skins. One of them demonstrated with a discarded child's skin from the pile, crawling into it through the mouth. The skin inflated like a balloon, took the shape of a little boy, stood up and smiled at us with dead eyes. My hands were shaking, but I remembered the emergency whistle on my keychain. I blew it as hard as I could, over and over, until my lungs burned. The sound did something to them. They started losing cohesion, becoming more liquid, their forms wavering. I grabbed both kids and ran. Their legs were partially paralyzed from whatever the things had been secreting, so I had to drag them, their feet scraping against the ground. Behind us, the things followed as moving puddles, reforming and reaching toward us with liquid tentacles that stretched impossibly long. A park ranger found us on the main trail an hour later, the kids barely conscious, and me covered in sweat and scratches. When we got back to the shelter with him, the Thompsons were there in their skins again, acting completely normal. "Oh, we were so worried," Patricia said, her face properly attached now. "We looked everywhere for you. Robert thinks they might have had altitude sickness. Sometimes happens to flatlanders." The ranger checked us over, gave the kids some water, and suggested we head home early. He seemed to believe their story. Why wouldn't he? They looked like a normal family concerned about fellow campers. I packed our stuff in 10 minutes and drove straight home. Never filed a report because who would believe it? I still have the blistered mark on Luis's shoulder, but doctors said it was probably a spider bite. Looking back now, I realize I'd seen them before. Different families, different names, but the same too-perfect coordination, the same smell covered by pine cologne. I think I saw them at a rest stop in Pennsylvania last spring, and maybe at a hiking trail in Virginia the year before that. Different bodies, different faces, but the same wrongness underneath. We don't go camping anymore. The kids ask about it sometimes, but I always find an excuse. I still see them occasionally, always different families, but I know it's them. They wave when they see me, like old friends. Sometimes I'll get a postcard from a national park I've never visited, just signed the Thompsons with no return address. Emma's 11 now, Luis is 8, and they don't remember much about that weekend. Kids are good at forgetting things that don't make sense, but sometimes Luis will stop playing and sniff the air, saying something smells like dead fish. And Emma refuses to shake hands with strangers, no matter how rude it seems. I still work at the pharmacy, still live in Camden, but I keep that whistle on my keychain, and I pay attention to families that seem too perfect, because somewhere out there, they're still shopping for new skins, and they remember us.